Have the Crusades really ended? Perhaps, if we looked at political maps and today's political environment, we can find some clues. We are going to be focusing on the nation of France, what it was then and what we see now, since they played one of the biggest roles in the Crusades. I want to show you something about the current French President Macron. In order to do that, I'm going to show you two different clips from a movie called Inglorious Bastards. In this first clip, a Nazi shows up to this Frenchman's home because he suspects that he's hiding Jews. If you notice at the very beginning of it, it starts off so nice and casual and they're just having a conversation and the Frenchman is pouring him a glass of milk. Doesn't seem threatening, right? Now watch. When somebody has an agenda, things can turn very quickly.
Conduct a thorough search before I can officially cross your family's name off my list. And if there are any irregularities to be found, rest assured they will be. That is unless you have something to tell me that makes the conducting of a search unnecessary. I might add also that any information that makes the performance of my duty easier will not be met with punishment. Actually, quite the contrary. It will be met with reward. And that reward will be your family will cease to be harassed in any way by the German military during the rest of our occupation of your country. You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
We clearly condemn this terrorist attack and this terrorist group and recognize the right of Israel to protect itself and react.
Yes, the polite formalities regarding Israel, right? They have a right to defend themselves. The pouring of the milk. But watch how things turn.
But day one, we say that this reaction and the fight against terrorism, because it is led by a democracy, should be compliant with international rules, rule of war, and humanitarian international law. And day after day, what we saw is a permanent bombing of civilians in Gaza. And I think it's very important to say the whole story. But I think this is the only solution we have. This is fire. Because it's important.
Boom. There it was. Did you notice how he said, since day one? Since day one, how could he anticipate anything that he felt to be inappropriate on the very first day? No. There's no way that he could have. What he's really saying is, anything Israel does to defend itself is going to be seen as not like a democracy. It's going to be offensive. It's going to be wrong. And look how he smiles when he says, from day one.
Gentlemen, let's discuss the prospect of ending the war tonight. So the way I see it, since Hitler's death of possible rescue rests solely on my reaction, if I do nothing, it's as if I'm causing his death even more than yourselves. Wouldn't you agree?
I guess so.
How about you, Yutovich?
I guess so too.
Okay, so this scene actually happens towards the end of the movie. The first scene that I played for you happens naturally at the beginning of the movie. Now, these two gentlemen, the one in the white coat and the one in the black shirt, they actually hunt Nazis, which is interesting because in the first scene, it's the Nazis hunting the Jews. And the tables have turned. And instead of the Nazi being poured a glass of milk, he is the one pouring the drinks, and it's red wine. Things have definitely gotten more intense. And he realizes that he's losing the war.
Gentlemen, I have no intention of killing Hitler and killing Goebbels and killing Goering and killing Bormann, not to mention winning the war single-handedly for the Allies, only later to find myself standing before a Jewish tribunal. If you want to win the war tonight, we have to make a deal.
If you want to win the war tonight, then you must agree to a ceasefire. It's really no different. Also, what I find interesting is that even though this Nazi knows he's losing, so he's begging for a deal, The allies, the good guys, have their hands tied behind their back, which is exactly what the international community is trying to do to Israel. They proverbially are having their hands tied behind their back with all the false accusations of war crimes and condemnations, because don't forget, the French president had to remind Israel that from day one, right? And this power play that's being put on is because they know deep down inside that those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. Remember what the Nazi said? He didn't want to face a Jewish tribunal.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
We know perfectly. Everybody knows the rules. I don't like what you did in front of me. Go out.
You notice how he says, in this place, you know better, and everybody knows the rules? Well, what does that mean, in this place? Because they're in Jerusalem, after all. Well, technically, they're on French territory in Jerusalem because they're at St. Anne's Cathedral. They've never really let go of their conquest and their claim for territory and domination over Israel from the Crusades. But let's keep watching.
I'm sorry, it's not. He knows the rules. Nobody has to provoke. Nobody, okay? We keep calm. We have a wonderful talk. The telephone is a great job in the city. I do appreciate guys. Please respect the rules as they are for centuries. They will not change with me. I can tell you. Okay? So everybody respect the rules.
See that Christian crusade mentality. Respect the rules. They are for centuries. They will not change with me. Now let's see what the former French president did, because the attitude is very consistent throughout time.
What do you want? Me to go back to my plane and go back to France? Is that what you want? Then let them go and let them do. No, that's no problem.
To see where we are today, let's first take a look at how it all started. We are going to delve into the French Catholic connection and how the Crusades are still in play with the French mentality today. France became a nation as the result of a Catholic conversion by a Germanic prince known to us as King Clovis. As a result of France becoming a nation because of a Catholic conversion, France is known as the Church's oldest daughter. Interestingly, this also made France the first non-Roman entity to spread Christianity throughout Europe. The kings of France partnered with the Pope, who was the head of the Catholic religion. With the close partnership of the Pope and the kings of France, France became an eager and major contributor to the Crusades. This allowed France to establish territories in the nation of Israel during those Crusades. Today, there are still 4 territories that exist in Israel as a result of that endeavor. Persecution, violence, and discriminatory laws directed towards Jews by Catholics and their eldest daughter France was common during the Middle Ages. However, power shifted quite often between Catholics and Muslims during these holy wars. In order to try and survive, Jews were forced to help Muslims fight off Christian crusaders. Despite the assistance, willingly or unwillingly, it was the Christians and the Muslims who would normalize relationships and give territories in Israel. St. Anne's Cathedral that you actually saw President Macron at is one of those gifts. During this horrific time, when Crusaders sieged Jerusalem, there's an absolutely horrific retelling of events that is found in the Muslim chronicles of Ibn al-Qalanasi. Here's what it says. The Jews assembled in their synagogue, and the Franks burned it over their heads. An investigative author and history professor expanded on the details of the events from his findings. Here's what he states. The Crusaders circled the screaming, flame-tortured humanity, singing, "Christ, we adore thee." In response to these horrific details that have been chronicled and found by historians, many quickly came to challenge the narrative, first documented by claiming that the synagogues were burned, but the Jews were not. If the disgusting, barbaric, and violent endeavors of the Catholic Church during the Crusades weren't enough, they were also the progenitors of the Inquisition. This led to the countless forced conversions, expulsions, and the incitement of violent riots, with the aim of massacring the Jews. For nearly 400 years, France held a special status in the Ottoman Empire called the French Protectorate of Jerusalem. However, Christianity did not remain the leading authority in Israel after the 1187 conquest of Jerusalem by Saladin. With Saladin's victory, Islam achieved its long-awaited goal, and Muslim colonialists now reigned where the Catholics once stood. Never wanting to relinquish control, the French eagerly partnered with the Islamic and Western leaders, such as the United Kingdom, during the Crimean War in the mid-1800s. This paid off greatly for France because the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire then gifted St. Anne's Cathedral to the French. Yep, that's the very same cathedral you saw the French President Macron yelling at the Israeli security guards. So when he's going on and on about the rules and saying that it's been this way for centuries, he's telling the truth. The French rule in Israel came to an end in 1918 with the British takeover of the territory that they named Palestine. Despite the fact that France's reign in Israel ended, France did not willingly accept the loss of the special status in the Middle East and continued to take steps to erase or trivialize the Jewish people. The French desire to take a special interest in the area, especially the French claims in Jerusalem, never stopped. Just as the desperate decision by the Jews in Israel to help the Muslims during the Crusades, and it yielded no peace, so too did the French Revolution in the 18th century not end the rampant anti-Semitism in France either. You would think that between the French Revolution and the British taking control over Israel that they were far beyond their Catholic roots and origins, but they simply weren't. The hatred that led them to kill many innocent Jewish lives during the Crusades continued on well into World War II. France failed to fully protect the Jews during the Holocaust. As a result, 25% of the Jews in France were murdered. It is well known the French Vichy government collaborated with Nazi occupiers. You know who the Nazi occupiers are, right? Yeah, they're the Nazi regime that was led by Hitler. And did Hitler have a role in the Middle East like France used to? Oh yeah, that's right. Hitler used to work with the Palestinian Muslim leader known as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. It took centuries of massacres for the world to finally recognize the theft and atrocities done to the Jewish people. With 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, the Jews were finally able to return to Israel without having to immediately fight in another crusade. Unfortunately, no amount of Jewish blood spilled will ever stop the holy wars against them. France refused to fully relinquish the claims made during the Crusades. Not only does France still have Catholic cathedrals in Israel, the French still say that their Catholic places of worship that still stand in Israel is still theirs. They refuse to let Israel go. They refuse to give up the territories that they stole from the Jews during that horrific Christian period of history.
Please respect the rules as they are for centuries. They will not change with me.
After World War II, on the surface, the French played nice with Israel after the Holocaust. At one point, France even became Israel's main weapon supplier. Sounds good, right? It was far from nice. Israel began to rely on France for military arms, with them being their, main supplier. However, when the Muslims and French made up, just as they did when they teamed up and partnered with each other during the Crimean War, France quickly reverted back to the same mentality that it had during the Crusades. It was fighting with the Muslim Arab community, and then it loved the Muslim Arab community, but the one thing that France and the Muslims always had in common is they hated the Jews. In 1967, the Muslim countries surrounding Israel decided to create a plan to surprise and retake Israel from the Jews, just as they had done, in times past during the Crusades. However, things were not going to be as easy for the Muslims, for the French, or for anybody.
Never again to be denied the wall. The land promised to Abraham, Israel, the only refuge left for every threatened Jew.
The Jewish people emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust, a changed people who refused to live in fear any longer. Israel had a plan to strike the Arab states that sought their death and destruction. Unbeknownst to France and their Muslim friends, Israel would strike first, preemptively in self-defense. Prior to Israel's preemptive self-defense move, the United States asked for a ceasefire, and France took it one step further by placing an arms embargo on the entire region 3 days prior to the start of the war. And this arms embargo would affect Israel the most. This was so bad, even the New York Times wrote about it. Okay, now tell me if this sounds a little familiar, okay? The New York Times writes, the double game, however, ended with the Six-Day War in 1967, which forced France to pick a side. In shock to its Israeli allies, it chose the Arab states despite aggressive moves by Egypt. Despite aggressive moves by Egypt. Did you hear that? Now replace that with despite aggressive moves by Hamas. France imposed a temporary arms embargo on the region, which mostly hurt Israel, and warned senior Israeli officials to avoid hostilities. France, the Catholic nation, just can't let things go and tends to repeat history. Let's look at where we are today with President Macron.
I have a message for President Macron. Today, Israel is defending itself on 7 fronts against the enemies of civilization. We're fighting in Gaza against Hamas, those savages who murdered, raped, beheaded, and burned our people on October 7th. We're fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the most heavily armed terror organization in the world, which was planning an even greater massacre than October 7th on our northern border, and that has rocketed Israeli towns and cities for nearly a year. We're fighting against the Houthis in Yemen and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria that together have launched hundreds of drones and missile attacks against Israel. We're fighting against terrorists in Judea and Samaria who are trying to murder civilians in the heart of our cities. And we're fighting against Iran, which last week fired over 200 ballistic missiles directly at Israel, and which stands behind the 7-front war against Israel. As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Yet President Macron and some other Western leaders are now calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Shame on them.
Oh, look at history repeating itself. The French President Macron trying to take the initiative at handcuffing Israel, just like they did during the Six-Day War, when the Arab states wanted to basically perform another Holocaust 20 years after the first one, because the first one wasn't bad enough, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of slaughter of innocent Jews during the Crusades wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for France to change. It wasn't enough for the Muslim Arab states to change. Now was it? Because France clearly reverted back to its old behavior. President Macron doesn't lead some new France that's all of a sudden friends with the Jews. Oh no, those Catholic bells were calling him home. He wasn't raised religious, but French President Macron still chose to convert to Catholicism on his own at a young age. Isn't that interesting? So much for the French Revolution. President Macron is King Clovis. President Macron is the church's oldest daughter. Nothing's really changed. The Muslim-French relationship that's like a I scratch your back, you scratch my back, you know, the enemy of my enemy type of frenemy relationship still runs strong. France to this day still refuses to acknowledge that East Jerusalem belongs to the Jews, the very Jews that they murdered and slaughtered when they took Jerusalem the first time during the Crusades. Never again is now, Macron. The Catholic Crusades must come to an end. Giving the relationship dynamic and hatred towards the Jews a different name throughout history, such as the Holocaust or the Six-Day War, doesn't change the crusade France is continuing against Israel.
If you want to win the war tonight, we have to make a deal.